I hear a glass. Or was that not?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, there we go.
Charlie, I've had a question that I've wanted to ask you for years. You have a famous quote, and this quote intersects with my world quite a bit. I teach high school history. I also teach a history class at McFleshman's, by the way, shameless plug.
Oh, like next week, right?
Next Monday
Yeah.
night, yeah. Beer and world history. And I have interpreted this quote of yours for myself on more occasions than I can count, but I'm wondering if you could do it for me. What do you say?
Depends what it is, but yeah, I'll have a go.
Okay. All right, here we go. Beer is the basis of modern static civilization.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no question. Well,
That's on the Mount Rushmore of quotes right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you cast your mind back 8,000 years, and if you're in the sort of what we refer to as the Fertile Crescent these days, so places like Iraq and so on. I mean, people had a nomadic existence, and they used to sort of be going from place to place, so sort of, taking goats with them and finding grass for the goats to eat and so on. And they used to carry barley with them, raw barley grain. And that's what they would eat, so they were biting into this grain, and it was hard and tough and astringent and didn't, made them cough and wasn't very nutritious and so on. Then they got it wet, and it started to sprout and germinate. So now it started tasting like bean sprouts. I don't think they knew what bean sprouts tasted like, but it tasted damn sight better than the raw barley. And then somehow they made this into a bread, and now it tasted really good. It tasted like malted nut balls, the sorts of things that Breeze sell, delicious. And that's a cure. If you talk to the good friends up the road there, tell them to send me some more malted nut balls. But anyway, so
you have another fan here.
and then
that'll be in the care package when we send the beer.
Thank you very much.
Coming your way.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then they sort of stored this bread in jars, and it got wet. And of course, there were yeast around the place, and they converted the sugars into alcohol. So they put the finger into this and tasted the liquid, and they thought, oh, that tastes good. And they drank it, and they fell over. And they thought, well, hell, this is good. And so they stopped all this nonsense of driving around. They moving around. They stayed put. They grew the grain. They did the primitive malting and brewing, and made the liquid. So they put all the tents in a circle and made a village, and that became a town and a city like, Madison. And so the whole basis of civilization is because of this discovery of beer. So the static civilization instead of this nomadic existence. Now, of course, bread comes into that as well, and other sort of agricultural crops. But beer was at the heart of it. People say to me sometimes, they say, which came first, beer or bread? I said, honey and mead. Because, with the honey being spontaneously fermented. And so yeah, but it's lost in the realms of, mists of time. Years ago when I used to have all sorts of guests come to talk to my class at UC Davis, Ken would come. I used to teach this big class, Introduction to Beer and Brewing. It became the most popular class on campus. It pushed the class on sex into second place, and the class on nutrition into third place. So if you want to know what the students at UC Davis are interested in, it was beer, sex, and food in that order, which entirely is logical. Anyway, so Ken used to come 3 times a year to talk to that class, and people like Dan Gordon from Gordon Beers, he used to come as well. And we used to get Fritz Maytag. And Fritz would tell the story of how they made the beer according to the ancient recipe of Ninkasi.
He made one, didn't he?
He did. And how they did it. And how they made this beer according to the hint and Ninkasi. And he said, in those days, there was no, we had to put hops in because that's the rule these days. So when it came to that point, I asked everybody to turn the other way, and I put a hop cone in there, And then they had a dinner, and they all sat around drinking out of the straws, just like they would have done, 8,000 years ago, several thousand years ago. And I said, Fritz, how did it taste? He said, Charlie, it wasn't very good, but we had a hell of a lot of fun doing it.
We've talked about history
many times on this podcast. And so I'm going to pose the question to you because we've asked it. If you were to have a beer from, say, 200, 500, 5,000 years ago, do you think it would be any good? Would you enjoy it compared to a modern beer?
Well, I'd probably, I don't think that's a valid question with all due respect, because you wouldn't make a comparison. You saw what was good 5 years ago will probably not be deemed good now. It would be compared to everything else. So would it be better? And certainly would it be safer than drinking the water? It most certainly would. And so I'd probably acquire a taste for it. So I mean, I find it impossible. People say, well, how's the beer now compared to how it was when you first started drinking beer? And I can't make that side-by-side comparison. It probably is more consistent now, even than it was 50 years ago. Let me do a calculation now. 55 years ago. But it's not easy to make those comparisons. I have a slide in one of my presentations somewhere. Not that I use slides very often, but there is one which basically gives a list of what was present in a brewery. And this is about 500 years ago. And you could instantly recognize from this inventory that, hey, that's a brewery. So the basic process hasn't changed, really, for hundreds of years. But what has changed is we understand how to do it, and how to do it much more consistently. So I think certainly from when hops were first introduced and used in beer, then I'm sure that there was a recognition. If you went back, you'd say, yeah, if you tasted something and say, what are you drinking? I think you probably would say, well, I'm drinking beer. But it probably wouldn't have been quite so refined as it is these days.
We're getting close to getting into the science of the beta glucans and the DMS. And if we don't watch it, we're gonna drift into that category, which a couple of things about. What do we want to talk about next? We have Charlie for another 20,
How about
20 minutes. Yeah.
You've earned this nickname, the Pope of Foam. The average person, if they crack open a bottle of beer, there is little to no foam. It's not like you're going to get if you're getting it maybe out of a tap. Bobby recently installed a Lucre faucet, and they were so excited because of what they could do with foam. What is the importance of foam in beer? Because I think the average person probably doesn't care, or they don't think about it.
Gary just opened the way for the next 25 plus
We're going to be here
minutes.
till midnight.
I love
now.
this.
I'll keep this short. Okay. When I first came to Davis, I actually, while they were upgrading my lab, and I couldn't use the laboratory, I actually got one type of beer and some glasses. And I went off to the photographic studio with the photographer. His name was Sam Wu. And we just took this beer and I poured it in loads of different ways. I poured it with a lot of foam, with no foam, moderate amounts of foam. And then we drained them, not by drinking, but by siphoning off the liquid. And so I got all sorts of different, halfway down the glass, and there was still some foam on some and no foam on others. There were different amounts of lacing and all these things. I took all these photographs and we showed them to people and said, which of these is the best? Ask some questions. And even those people who confess to the crime, it is a crime, of drinking the beer straight out of the container. But even those people said, hey, the best ones are the ones with the foam. Because that's the signature of what beer is. It's the foam on it. And people are expecting to see a good foam. And if it's not there, they say, oh, there's something wrong with that. They might say, oh, the fizz is all wrong. Or it's not as fresh, or, there are all sorts of things they're going to say. But people drink with their eyes, and they notice the foam. They expect the foam to be there. And if it's not there, they're starting to ask questions. And that, as I say, is even those people who normally don't even put it in a glass. And I remember from my days at Bass, if we did a trial, we might do a trial looking for a subtle difference in flavor. Maybe 2 beers, and we served them. The one we served if we made the mistake of giving one with a better head than the other, that was always the one that's preferred. Always the one they preferred it, the one with the head on it. So, people, they, to greater extent, they expect to see a foam on the beer. Years ago, I founded, get this, the European Brewery Convention Foam Group. So all these boffins,
Of course you did.
working on foam. Anyway, one of the members was from Germany, and he came to me and he said, "Why you?" I said, "What do you mean, why me?" "Well, why have you started this group?" I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "You're English." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You have no foam on the beer." I said, "And you've been to London, so you've never properly been to England, have you? If you go to the north of England, you've got to have, a couple of inches of foam, and you've got to have a pint of liquid. So that's why the glasses are bigger size. You have a line on it, tells you you've got a pint of liquid, and you've got the foam on top.
Where's Christoph?
People have asked questions in Parliament about this. I mean, this is very, very important stuff. So thank you for asking the question.
Right.
But it's a psychological thing. It's totally a psychological thing. And
I'm refraining from showing you my glass with the lacing on it. It's from afar at this point, but I right there you have it. And I have been known to send Charlie a picture, I don't know, every year or so of a glass with lacing, and I think of you at the end of that glass. I think of how that foam stacked up and left that. Yeah.
So I mean, this country, I would say probably has got us in many places the worst foam performance of anywhere on the planet.
Whoa. Right. With Belgium being number one, would you put
Belgium, the Czech Republic, Germany, the north of England, all of anywhere in England these days, foam it's all about cleaning the glasses properly,
right,
and pouring it properly. But in this country, so many glasses are just not washed properly,
right,
and so you've got they're either washed alongside the food plates or something like that, or their detergent's not being rinsed away afterwards. And as you said earlier, Bobby, I was a QA manager at Bass for a while, and when people complained about the foam, it was never the beer. It was always the way they were pouring it out, or the dispense setup, or the glasses weren't washed properly, and so on. Nearly all the time, 99% of the time, I would say it's that. So the secret for good quality foam, first and foremost, is how is it poured out? What is it poured into? And so many places in this country fail that. You can always tell you got those ugly bubbles on the side of the glass when you first pour it out. You got those bubbles, and that's those are greasy spots.
Mm-hmm. I remember being in Ireland many times, and this wasn't just at the Guinness Brewery, but the bartender would go out of their way to show you how to properly pour a Guinness. Yeah. Because they're very anal retentive about how people present the product.
That's right.
Sure.
And you've got to be patient as well. It's not a quick thing, for Guinness, you wait a while, there's plenty of time, and 10 minutes later you get your pint, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
It's a very strong brand, Guinness.
It is. I often tell this story. It's my friends at Guinness, I think, are tired of me hearing this story, but a woman emailed me and she said, "Is it true the difference between Guinness brewed in Dublin and Guinness brewed elsewhere in the world is they marinate a dead cow in the beer in Ireland?" So I emailed back and I said, "Madam, I've been part of the brewing industry since 1978, and I've never heard anything quite so stupid. Everyone knows it's a sheep." And she emailed me back and said, "Thank you for the inside information." I mean, isn't that terrifying?
We had an episode on the Rheinheitsgebot.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a court case where there was an actual dissolved cat in a vat of beer that went to trial in Germany.
Right. It was deemed not a violation of the Rheinheitsgebot as well.
In all of your free time, you should listen to that one. That one derailed pretty quickly.
Dan Gordon tells you, he tells the the real history behind the Reinheitsgebot, 1516. Because Dan was a student at Weinstetten. He didn't come to UC Davis. I mean, he lived down the road, but he went to Munich, and of course learned all things German there, including at the time, of course, while he was there, he invented the garlic fry. That's another story. But they introduced the Reinheitsgebot to stop people using dodgy materials. People were putting cow bile in the drink and all sorts of things. So they said, enough of this. You use malt, hops, and water, because they didn't know what yeast was at the time, so that wasn't on the list of ingredients. To stop people using dodgy materials, or indeed to use other materials they wanted to conserve for other purposes. So it's become a sort of a holier than thou purity, this superiority complex. But as I said, what seems like a long time ago now, I said, I'm perfectly okay with the rice and the corn, but there's a lot to be said for malt.
Absolutely. I'm getting prodded in the side. If I don't ask this question before we finish this interview, I'll be
exiled.
Exiled
from his own brewery.
So I listened to a different podcast, and it's called it's Drink Beer and Think Beer. And when he concludes his interview, he asked the interviewee if they could have. So it's called the Green Door Question. And it's in reference to a show called The Other Place. And I'm not familiar with it, but I'm now giving you a secondhand interpretation. At the end of the episode, one character gets to pass through a door. They get to be anywhere, anytime, any place. But he asked it in the context of beer. If you could be anywhere, anytime, any place when it comes to beer, where is that place?
Well,
that's a great question.
That is a great question. And
with anyone, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be rather keen to have been there when Ken Grossman started his original brewery. I'd be rather keen to have been a fly on the wall to see exactly how things were. I've heard the stories. He's told me them many times, but I'd love to have been there. I'd also like to been, perhaps involved in somewhere like the Bass Brewing Company back in the day when the very first sort of big name scientists were plying their trade there. There was a guy, for example, called Cornelius O'Sullivan. And this was in the late 19th century. And at the time, he was being paid £5,000 a year. He was being paid big, mega bucks, And I'd love to have been around to see just how things were being done in those days. And to the previous question, to see just how good the beer was at that time. So those would be a couple of... I wouldn't want to transport myself back to ancient Syria with 8,000 years or so, but those would be a couple of places I would very much like.
It's hard to argue with that. You segued perfectly. Do you have a connection to Mr. Ken Grossman? Because that would be it.
I do know the guy.
I don't know. So I reach out to Dan Carey here once in a while in Wisconsin. It's at New Glarus.
Yeah.
And he has gone into full on grandfather mode. So he spends his time with his grandkids. It's hard to get him out to do a show or to be present at a beer fest. But I wonder what Ken Grossman's time looks like these days. Very respectful for how demanded it may be.
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to ask him on your behalf. I mean, Ken's still very much involved, and continues to be a major driving force in the company. Brian is increasingly involved as well. And of course, there are a number of other people, including a fellow Briton who is the chief executive these days, Price Greenhouse.
Okay.
But Ken, as I said, back in the day at UC Davis, I taught that class 3 times a year, and every time Ken came to talk to that class. And that speaks volumes.
Yep.
And amazing. What he used to do was to talk how it was and how it is now. So he'd show, his original cooler, for example, his wort cooler. Now it's, and how it is now. And he'd show all the tanks that he welded. And he talked about how he made his first Lauterton, individually drilling the holes himself in person
Right.
to make his first Lauterton, and now comparing to what they've got these days. So Ken, it's an amazing story. And, people say to me, what book should I read? I say, well, if it's got the name Bamforth on it, you should make sure you read all them. But seriously,
Agreed.
Let's spend some time there.
Ken Grossman's Beyond the Pale is an amazing read.
I read. Yep.
It's an
Yeah,
amazing
that
read.
is a great book.
And in person, he brings that to life. And
Right.
Let's see if I can persuade him to join you. But
Wonderful.
Can I just make a quick shout out to the Sierra Nevada, and I call it green, the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That was my gateway into craft beer. That was your gateway into craft beer. That was everybody's gateway.
It really was. Yeah, it really was.
And that beer,
yeah.
Pure, I'm going through the store and, Celebration Ale and whatever. But then you come by that.
Yeah.
And you have one and you're just like, you're transported back into 1993 and you're like, oh my gosh, this is still
Right.
unbelievably good.
Absolutely. And it's great for you to say that. And I encourage everybody to go out and buy a 6-pack because it still remains one of the great beers. And from time to time, I have wacky ideas, things I suggest. And let me tell you, anything I suggest ain't going to change the way they produce Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. It's set in stone because it is such a success story. It's a brilliant beer. I mean, I have to say, the ultimate pale ale in this country.
I don't think any brewer would disagree with that.
Yeah.
And probably not most of the market.
Right. So everybody needs to go out and get a 6-pack of pale ale and see for themselves.
I have a question. I'm sure you've heard this joke before. It was a Monty Python joke. Why is American beer like making love in a canoe? They're both fucking close to water.
Yes. I really don't think that was Monty Python. I'd be a bit.
There was a live. They told it. I don't know where it came from, but they told it at like Hollywood Bowl film. But you've been in the U.S. now a couple decades.
Yeah.
I think that at one time maybe that may have been warranted, but has the beer scene in the U.S. changed a lot since you've been here?
Oh, it has, yeah. I mean, it's obviously there's a lot more breweries these days and different styles of product. When I came here, for example, no hazy beer, not officially, deliberately hazy.
Thank goodness.
My days of Bass, if I'd suggested, hey, let's make a hazy beer, I wouldn't have survived very long. So that's a big difference. And there are some excellent products around, including from the company I advise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But they're harder to do than non-hazy beers in many ways.
I will say I've stolen from conversations we've had with you on how to make the best ones. It's not trivial.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different. There's a lot more brewing companies. There's a lot of different styles of products around. These, like I talked about earlier on, the sort of the tendency to want to put non-beer materials into beer and so on. So it is a different world. But I'm delighted, that we still see the sort of the pale ales of this world still alive and very much kicking.
Charlie, can I close with one quick question before we have our formal ending?
Yep.
If you could put 4 people in this country on the Mount Rushmore of craft brewing, who's on that mountain?
Well, Ken Grossman.
100%.
First and foremost. I guess I would put Fritz Maytag on there as well. I would put. We used to say Bobby Fleshman, wouldn't it? But he would say.
I have some stairs to climb.
I would put Vinny in there as well.
Yeah.
And thinking who else I might include in there without.
Can I give you my last one?
Yeah.
Charlie Papazian.
Yeah. Charlie's a good guy.
Has anyone meant more to craft brewing than Charlie Papazian? Now, obviously, he hasn't turned out the product that the others have.
Right.
Yeah,
But
I mean, you've got to have those who serve as well as those who own the breweries as well. But I would be very careful. I wouldn't want. There's so many possibilities, so many people that I've interacted with and met in the brewing industry that have done so much for the industry, so that it's to my mind. Ken is complete no-brainer of a nominee. He would be straight off the bat. I would say it's like these, say something and say, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? If I say this, then what you just said, Ken. After that, I would need to analyze and discuss and then come up with a reasoned priority list.
yeah,
That's
Thank you.
awesome to hear from the inside because we think the same thing of Ken, for sure.
We'd love to
Yeah.
talk with him.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can do.
Thank you for your time. This is amazing. And
All right.
we're all very jealous of what's in your glass and how fresh it is.
Oh,
That's
Empty
impressive.
as well.
Oh,
thank you, Charlie. It's
Beautiful.
good to meet you.
All right. Nice to
Yes.
meet you. So thanks very
Yes.
much. All right.
absolutely. All right. Cheers, Charlie.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
And that is going to wrap up this episode of Respecting the Beer. Make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player so you never miss an episode, and join the Facebook group to get updates between the episodes, and support the show over on Patreon. Links to both of these are in the show notes. And until next time, please remember to respect the beer.